Floriana was studying another case, contemplating the meaning of human life. Behind every line, she read, lay someone's fate, shattered hopes and universal despair. The young lawyer mentally asked herself for the umpteenth time, why don't people appreciate what they have? Why does love fade so quickly and families fall apart? There was no clear answer to these difficult questions, a fact that upset her deeply. Floriana opened another folder detailing yet another family's collapse. She had barely skimmed the first paragraph when her office door swung open noisily. Mr. Campbell stood on the threshold. Floriana sprang up reflexively. Mr. Campbell, I haven't finished reviewing all the materials yet. Floriana, why do you always jump up when I appear? We're not in the army. I'm not against discipline, but this is excessive. Floriana knew from experience it was better not to argue with superiors. She slowly lowered herself back into her chair. Mr. Campbell seemed pleased with her compliance. That's better, Floriana. You've been jumping up like a schoolgirl. It's not your first day here. It's time to get used to our company's conditions. They're quite mild, creating a favourable environment for productive work. At least, I'm convinced of this. The chief's smile gave Floriana more confidence. She smiled back. Yes, the conditions here are very comfortable, and I am used to them. It's just that I jump up involuntarily. It's become a reflex. At university, they drilled into us that rules of subordination are a mandatory in any structure, and during our internships, we were constantly on edge. Mr. Campbell lowered his heavy body into a vacant chair. Oh, don't get me started on this subordination nonsense. It was invented by bureaucrats. They need to justify their salaries, so they invent different rules. Of course, I'm for discipline, but everything should be in moderation. His rather lengthy monologue seemed to bore even himself, and he exhaled noisily. A moment later, the man leaned closer to the miniature fan on Floriana's desk. It's sweltering today. I can hardly breathe. All right, Floriana, let's talk business. I have a task of a personal nature for you. The thing is, an acquaintance of mine is going through a divorce. It's a complicated situation, and she needs the support of a good lawyer. The topic is delicate because she's quite well known in business circles and doesn't want publicity about the divorce proceedings. Her husband is a young, overzealous scoundrel, and his insolence knows no bounds. Not only did he ruin the life of a wonderful woman, but he wants to take away part of her property. He's flooded the poor woman with lawsuits and used her money to hire a whole team of lawyers. But she and I have decided on a different tactic, and you're ideally suited to deliver the main blow. Floriana blurted out, Mr. Campbell, but I'm still just... The chief cast a thoughtful glance at his subordinate. I know you're still learning and haven't handled any difficult cases yet, but you haven't lost a single trial, and that's a critical indicator in our work. In fact, I'm confident you can handle this case as well. Here's her file, and here's my friend's phone number. Set up a meeting and start working on it. The chief left, carefully closing the door. A whirlwind of emotions stirred in the young lawyer's soul. On one hand, she felt proud that Mr. Campbell trusted her. On the other, she feared she might not live up to his expectations. Floriana Polono had been working at the private law firm for less than 3 years, but in that relatively short time she'd seen it all. On her very first day, her boss hadn't bothered with standard questions. He'd merely glanced at her and decisively stated, You'll be handling divorce cases. Of course, back then, Floriana was taken aback, but she gave a deep nod, signalling her acceptance of the chief's command. She expected further explanations, but Mr. Campbell just stared at her with a dissatisfied look. If everything's clear, why are we still standing here? Floriana shifted uncertainly. But I don't know what to do yet. Mr. Campbell flung his sharply sharpened pencil, spearing it into a pile of papers. This dramatic gesture made a powerful impression on the recent law school graduate. "If you don't know yet, then go study the urgent cases. We don't have time to waste when there's plenty of work to do. We're swamped here, so there's no time for pleasantries. The company's reputation is at stake. You understand, rookie?" Floriana nodded again. She had expected a very different encounter. She was completely bewildered by the behaviour of the man under whose authority she was to work. In despair, she wanted to cry and run away from this office, but Mr. Campbell, noting the girl's expressive face, realised he had gone a bit too far. In a more peaceful tone, he said, "No tears here, please. This isn't the place for the faint-hearted. You'll soon realise that yourself. It's better to get used to the peculiarities of the job from your very first day. And I advise you to pay less attention to my moods." Mr. Campbell winked at the new girl. "Sometimes I can be worse than any fairy tale villain, but I remain kind at heart." Very soon, Floriana realised that Mr. Campbell was indeed the kindest person. He treated his subordinates in a fatherly way, for which he was loved and greatly respected by the team. And now, after the boss had left, Floriana looked at her watch and realised that her lunch had already started. The problem was that she had arranged to meet her fiancé during that time. She called him, and with tenderness in her voice whispered, "David, my boss held me back. I completely forgot about you." Without waiting for words of reproach from her fiancé, she quickly added, "Honey, please don't be angry." There was a hearty laugh, and then the voice that made the girl's heart race said, "Miss Polono, you know how to sweet talk and divert attention. Anyway, I'm pleased to know that you still remember your fiancé from time to time. Honey, I'd still like to see you, so I'm waiting for you in our usual spot at the park. Remember, you only have 10 minutes to get ready. Try not to disappoint me this time." Floriana guessed that David was alluding to a recent incident that happened while meeting his parents. David's parents had greeted their future daughter-in-law with joyful exclamations. "Floriana, we're so happy that our son has finally decided to say goodbye to bachelor life," his father said. "You're so pretty, a worthy companion for our David," his mother added. Floriana was a little embarrassed by the overt flattery, but didn't show it. She had no idea what else lay ahead of her. When everyone sat down at the richly laid table, the questions began. In their unrestrained curiosity, David's parents went so far as to ask about her father's earnings. They were most interested in property matters, and when Floriana told them the tragic story of her mother's death, they didn't even express basic sympathy. David's father merely asked, "I suppose your mother left you a substantial inheritance?" This question angered the girl, and she replied rather rudely, "Is money really the most important thing to you?" The tone of the future daughter-in-law displeased the man. He responded with an obvious challenge. "It's easy for you to discuss the importance of money when you have an all-powerful daddy behind you. But our son has no such reliable support. We're simple village workers. We value every hard-earned penny, while your daddy's money seems to come easily for him." Floriana couldn't help herself. "My dad stands at the operating table 24 hours a day to earn a decent salary. But his main goal isn't money, it's saving human lives. By the way, he also grew up in a village and then went to study. What stopped you from doing the same?" David realised that the argument had gone too far, but he didn't know how to defuse the situation. Luckily, his mother helped establish peace at the table by scolding the disputants. "What's the use of stirring up trouble? Floriana is right. Not everything in the world is decided by money. There are more important things." The meal continued peacefully, but Floriana was left with an unpleasant feeling. She refused to spend the night at their house, citing urgent work. However, David didn't want to let her go. "Where are you going at night? Stay, and don't take offence at my father. He's old school, so he's used to thinking that way." "I'm not offended by your father. What surprises me is that you didn't say a word in my and my father's defence." David laughed hoarsely. "Floriana, you're the lawyer. It's not for me to compete with you." These words, caressing her ear and heart, relieved the girl's heart a little, but she didn't change her mind. Getting behind the wheel of the car her father had given her for successfully graduating from law school, she drove off to the city. She had expected David to offer to escort her, but he didn't. He said goodbye half-heartedly and headed home. The girl felt a little bitter, but tried to console herself. David hasn't seen his parents in a long time, so it's understandable that he wants to be with them longer. Besides, he doesn't have to cater to my every whim. After all, it's my own fault that the conversation didn't go well. I could have kept quiet, if only honouring his father. After the unsuccessful first visit, she accompanied David to his parents' house several times. They no longer bombarded her with questions, but instead emphasized their joy that their son had chosen such a wonderful girl. Floriana never lacked admirers. From early childhood she was surrounded by male attention. In kindergarten, boys eagerly fulfilled the whims of the capricious little girl. Later, when Floriana was in first grade, 2 young suitors even fought over her. Surprisingly, the teacher scolded her rather than the boys. "Floriana, I consider you the instigator of this fight. If you've decided to be friends with someone, choose one. Don't flirt with both at once." The girl disagreed with the teacher. With a sly face and a touch of insolence, she said, "What if I want to be friends with all the boys at once?" The teacher, unable to answer the first grader's question, became flustered and changed the subject. Later, she expressed her concerns to the girl's father. "Dr. Polono, please don't misunderstand, but your daughter is behaving inappropriately with boys." The man was so surprised he couldn't hold back his exclamation. "What do you mean, inappropriately? How am I supposed to interpret that?" Realizing her poor choice of words, the teacher tried to salvage the situation. "I'm sorry, I didn't express myself well. You see, your daughter is clearly a leader, and all the boys are drawn to her." Anthony Polono expressed surprise again. "I don't see anything wrong with that." The teacher became even more confused. "Indeed, there's nothing wrong with your girl having leadership qualities, but she also has a striking appearance, so our boys are eager to win her favour." The man laughed. "Oh, is that what you mean? But it's a natural process. Think back to your childhood. I, personally, tried to court all the girls while I was still in kindergarten. In my opinion, there's nothing wrong with such relationships." But the teacher persisted. "I entirely agree with you. Friendship is beneficial in all its forms, but it's impossible to be friends with everyone simultaneously. Floriana first promised Victor that she would be his friend. Then she made the same promise to Paul. As a result, the boys fought. And you think my daughter is to blame for this? Of course. Your Floriana provoked the boys to sort out their relationship with their fists. First, she turned one's head, then the other's. Please influence your daughter," Mrs. Morgan exclaimed. But Mr. Polono only grinned. "How can I influence her? Forbid her to socialize with her classmates? Do you think that's the right approach?" Finding no understanding with the girl's father, Mrs. Morgan took offence at him, but began to take out her displeasure on the little girl. It escalated to the point where, in a fit of uncontrollable anger, the teacher humiliated Floriana in front of the entire class. "Polono, nothing good will come of upstarts like you. You'll grow up and end up in the gutter." The first grade girls didn't understand the true meaning of this expression, but they all giggled, pointing their fingers at Floriana. Paul, whom she had rejected, tried the hardest. Floriana ran out of the classroom and hid under the stairs so no one could see her crying. When Dr. Polono came to school to pick up his little daughter, Mrs. Morgan was surprised. "Isn't Floriana at home?" "If she were at home, I wouldn't have come for her. Where is my daughter?" The exasperated father demanded an answer, and the teacher was at a loss for words. Stammering, she began to explain confusingly. "You see, Dr. Polono, your girl is sometimes uncontrollable. Today we had an incident. Floriana threw a tantrum during class and then ran out of the classroom. I thought she'd gone home." Dr. Polono was furious. He hissed angrily, "Mrs. Morgan, pray to God that nothing happens to my child." An elderly cleaning lady helped find the missing child. As teachers and high school students began to search the building and the surrounding area, the woman asked, "Why are you all in such a fuss?" One of the teachers thought to ask her, "Have you seen a first grader? A little blonde girl with pigtails?" The elderly woman put on an important face. "Every other girl here has pigtails, but there's one hiding under the stairs." Dr. Polono rushed to the place the cleaning lady was pointing to, and there he found his daughter, sleeping on dusty things. Mrs. Morgan, frightened out of her wits, said confusedly, "Well, nothing terrible has happened. The girl has been found, and you shouldn't have panicked." Dr. Polono hissed threateningly, "We'll sort this out yet. I promise you that I will not let this outrageous affair slide. Where has it been seen that first-grade girls run away from lessons?" Mrs. Morgan was trembling like a leaf on the wind, but she didn't want to admit her guilt. "How can I keep track of them all? I'm alone, and I have 24 of them." Dr. Polono was merciless to the teacher when he pronounced his verdict. "You must have made a mistake in your choice of profession. It's dangerous to entrust children to you." Dr. Polono did not scold his daughter for her rash act, but tried to find out what prompted her to run away from the lesson. Floriana immediately confessed, "Mrs. Morgan said that bad words about me. Everyone began to laugh at me and I took offence, especially at Paul, and it's a good thing I didn't become friends with him." Dr. Polono was shocked at what he heard from his daughter. The next morning, he went straight to the school principal and demanded action against the teacher, who allowed herself such statements in the presence of children. The principal listened to the outraged father and sighed heavily. "Dear Dr. Polono, I understand you perfectly well, but I can't do anything. There's a chronic shortage of staff, especially in elementary school. No one wants to work with kids." Dr. Polono stared at the principal. "So you won't take any measures?" The principal waved his hands. "Alas, the only thing I can do in this situation is to give Mrs. Morgan a stern warning. If I apply more radical measures, she'll wave goodbye to us. That is, she'll go to another school, where she'll be welcomed with open arms." Dr. Polono hadn't expected such a turn. He asked confusedly, "What am I to do? Put up with the lawlessness that reigns in your school?" The principal tried to smile. "Why so unflattering about our institution? We do our best to educate future citizens. But if you're personally not satisfied with our school, you can transfer your daughter to another one. As for me, I can offer only this solution. Transfer the girl to a parallel class." Dr. Polono agreed. Floriana learned about her father's conversation with the principal a little later when they went to visit her grandparents, and she accidentally overheard adults talking. Having learned about the teacher's outrageous act, the grandmother began to rant. "What on earth is going on? This is a real outrage. In our time, the teacher was a role model, a paragon of decency. And now what? The principal told you right, son. You should transfer to another school." "Mum, I told the principal, and I'll repeat it to you. I'm not going to raise my daughter in greenhouse conditions. I want her to be prepared for any hardship in life." The grandmother said judgmentally, "So you want to throw her right into the water? If she doesn't swim, let her drown?" Anthony grumbled unhappily. "Mum, that's not an excellent comparison." A few seconds later he added, "You know very well that Floriana is the most precious thing I have." It was this phrase, or rather the tone with which it was uttered, that turned everything over in the little girl's soul. She vowed that she would never again upset her father. That day, Floriana Polono decided that she would not get involved with boys. True, she soon forgot the last promise, but the girl became more careful about choosing friends. After David's call, Floriana didn't hesitate long and immediately went to meet him. She literally ran to the park where her fiancé was waiting for her. Her high heels hindered this mode of travel, and several times the girl risked falling. David noticed her from afar and waved in greeting. He was sitting on a park bench with a smile, watching his bride. When Floriana plopped down beside him, breathless, David laughed. "Yes, you obviously have problems with sprinting. After the wedding, I'll have to take care of your physical training." The girl still hadn't caught her breath after running, so she didn't answer right away. "Are you kidding at me?" The young man drew her to himself and gently kissed her forehead. "What do you mean? Do I look like an evil torturer? It was just very amusing to watch you run." "And if I had crashed, would it have looked funny too?" Floriana's voice sounded resentful, and David made a funny grimace. "Floriana, don't take offence at such trifles. Perhaps I made a bad joke. Forgive this rascal, he won't do it again," the young man said, making a funny face at her. David knew well what annoyed and what made his future spouse happy. After all, they had been dating for 2 years, a considerable period by today's standards. Despite his education in construction field, he was an excellent physiognomist. From a person's facial expressions and gestures, David could unmistakably determine their mood. This ability was very helpful in working with clients. If he noticed that someone was dissatisfied, he would let his natural charm take over. The young man also had no misfires with women. He tried to surround each girl or woman with attention and care, and it worked without fail. But David quickly tired of each new romance and parted with his girlfriends without regret. His parents scolded their son for frivolity, his father being especially diligent in this. "David, you'll waste your whole life like this. I don't understand what you're so obsessed about. Are you constantly looking for a princess?" Such reproaches made the young man laugh. "What if I'm lucky and some princess really falls in love with me?" "You're a troublemaker, David, living in dreams. You're a countryman yourself, and you should look for a girl from your own circle to marry. It's a pity it didn't work out with Laurie. She would have made a good wife." The mention of his former lover caused both longing and irritation. David made incredible efforts to forget about her, and his efforts were not in vain. The more time passed, the more the past faded. Meeting Floriana proved that dreaming wasn't harmful. Although their acquaintance occurred under rather strange circumstances, David immediately realized that this girl was sent to him by fate. After serving in the army, he returned to his native village full of hope, but for several months he couldn't find a decent job. His parents patiently tolerated his chronic dependency, trying to help him with advice, and more often with reproaches. "David, stop fooling around. How long do you intend to chill out?" his father asked from time to time. "Dad, you can see that I'm looking for a job." "Where are you looking? At home, lying on the couch?" "Dad, why start an empty conversation on this subject when you know very well what kind of job situation we're in?" "You're not looking hard enough. We have a shortage of people on the farm, and you'd be surely hired in workshops or construction sites. Did you study for nothing? Do you want me to get you a job at the fuel depot?" Mother immediately joined the conversation, offering her own employment options. "We also need responsible people without bad habits. The pay is good and the work isn't hard because everything is mechanized." Usually at this point, a dispute would break out between his parents, which allowed David to sneak out of the house. He didn't support either of the opposing sides because one day he realized that he didn't want to spend his life in the village. However, this realization didn't come immediately. Before the army and shortly after his service, he didn't consider village life so flawed. David even planned to settle down in his native land and have many children. After all, back in school, he had fallen in love with a girl whom he long considered the standard of beauty. Laurie Walsh reciprocated his love. She wrote him tender letters when he was in the army. David got used to the idea that he should marry her. But a tragedy befell Laurie that ruined all the young man's plans. The accident occurred just during his job search period, and it was this circumstance that made David reconsider his intentions. Without informing his parents, He simply ran away from home, taking a little money from the family piggy bank. His mother was aghast when he called 2 days later to let her know he was okay. "David, your father and I almost went crazy. We didn't know what to think. Is that the way to treat your parents? Was it so hard to warn us?" The grown son began to ineptly justify himself. "Mum, I'll return the money as soon as I get my first paycheck. I'll send it to you by transfer or bring it myself." But Nina impatiently interrupted her son. "What does money have to do with it? You did something terrible, and that's a more important thing than money." When David heard his mother's sobs over the phone, he physically felt how her tears echoed with pain in his heart. "Mum, please don't cry. Believe me, I didn't mean to hurt you. Everything just happened spontaneously, as if someone from above told me to go to the city, that my destiny was there." This confession calmed his mother a little. "Maybe it's true. Maybe you'll find a good job in the city, and God willing, you'll meet a nice girl." David felt that she had something else to say, and he was not mistaken. With a heavy sigh, the woman said, "I didn't want to tell you, but Laurie left too. Her father took her away. They're very upset with us. Maybe it's for the best that he did." David agreed. "You're right, Mum. It's better for everyone. Let them judge me, call me a coward, but I'm not ready for such a serious test." The mother said nothing, but from her restless breathing, the son realized that she fully supported him. David's job search was lucky. Almost without leaving the station, he found a suitable position in a pizzeria. The young man went into the establishment just to have a snack, but right at the entrance, his gaze fell on a vacancy announcement. He asked out of curiosity, "How long have you had a vacancy for a courier?" The girl grinned. "Since this morning. A few people have already applied, but the owner didn't like them." David asked with a chuckle, "Maybe I'd be more to your master's liking?" The girl held her gaze on him. "Quite possibly. He is a bore, but he pays well. If you don't have a weakness for drink and are honest about your duties, you should give it a try." Without waiting for David's answer, the girl called out, "Mr. Hasley, there's another interested candidate." Before David could blink, a short man in a chef's hat appeared. He looked at David for a long time, then began to study his documents with the same intensity. Finally, he said, "Well, young man, let's see what you're capable of. If you pass the probationary period, I'll keep you. I can't promise much, but you won't be disappointed." Despite its modest size, the pizzeria was popular with the townspeople. It was especially crowded at lunchtime, but some pizza lovers ordered late in the evening and even at night. David travelled around the city in the owner's car, delivering orders, often forgetting to eat. He frequently had to work overtime, but never once expressed dissatisfaction. The owner really paid well, and the guy soon managed to get a decent apartment in a house not far from his workplace. One summer evening, Mr. Hasley asked him to stay a little longer. "David, we have a real mess today. You could say a disaster. Andy suddenly fell ill and there are plenty of orders. Help me out." Despite his exhaustion, David cheerfully declared, "Mr. Hasley, I'm at your complete disposal. Command me." The owner immediately gave him a list of orders and said, "David, just try to meet the delivery times. There are people on this list that I don't want to upset." The young man wasn't surprised by the request but asked, "So tell me, whom to serve first?" "You'll go to this address first. Dr. Kevin Burnham is our regular customer and my saviour. A few years ago, I was in a car accident. I was badly injured and thought I'd never walk again. That probably would have happened if I hadn't been lucky enough to get to Dr. Burnham. He's a God-given doctor, a real talent, even though he's very young. He's a little older than you." David was very impressed by the story and eager to see the wizard doctor. But when he arrived at the address and rang the doorbell, a girl suddenly ran out of the apartment, followed by a young man in a fancy outfit. David guessed that he was an accidental witness to a love drama. This guess was confirmed by the words the young man called after the girl. "Floriana, wait! You misunderstood everything. I'm ready to wait for you, even for ages." The girl shouted back, "Kevin, Please don't make such sacrifices. Why can't you realize that I just don't love you?" The couple argued for a minute or two on the floor below, and David patiently waited for the denouement. Finally, a door slammed loudly, and soon the young doctor returned. From his upset face, David realized that this evening had clearly not gone well for him. But the courier's job didn't include consoling customers, so he said the catchphrase, "There is your pizza, and we're glad you don't change your taste preferences." The young man stared blankly at David, then said sluggishly, "Oh yes, I'd forgotten I ordered pizza. Don't need it now, though." Afraid that the upset doctor might refuse the order, he hastily handed him 2 boxes. The doctor immediately took out his wallet and paid. The next moment, the apartment door slammed, so David didn't have time to deliver the final phrase. Since he had neither time nor desire to dwell on the doctor's problems, David quickly went down to the first floor and headed for the car. He suddenly stopped short, however, because near the car stood the same girl who had caused the good doctor such suffering. Noticing the courier's confusion, the stranger asked, "Would you give me a lift to the city centre? I don't have my car today." Naturally, David couldn't refuse the girl at such a late hour, but he warned her, "I'll take you all the way home, but on the way I have to stop at 4 addresses." The girl smiled. "I'm in no hurry. I'm even interested in learning the intricacies of courier work." Her soft voice, especially her smile, made the strongest impression on David. He had never experienced such feelings when meeting girls before. At first he was even a little confused, but the girl was the first to start a conversation. She introduced herself and mentioned that she worked at a law firm. Then she began to ask about his work. Floriana behaved casually, as if they had known each other for years. David quickly forgot about his initial awkwardness. He quipped, told jokes, and shared funny stories from his life as a courier. That night changed everything in David's life. The next morning, he realized that Floriana was sent to him by fate. Terribly nervous, he called the girl and asked her on a date. She accepted. Pleasant memories flashed in David's head for a brief moment as he watched Floriana, but all extraneous thoughts receded when she settled down next to him. Floriana looked guiltily at her fiancé. "David, sorry I'm late. The boss gave me a new case, so I had to stay a bit longer." The young man asked in an indifferent tone, "And what is it?" The girl began to apologize again. "David, I can't disclose confidential information." The young man remarked with resentment in his voice, "Oh yes, I forgot that we're birds of a different feather. I'm just a delivery boy, a pizza delivery boy, and you're an important person." A nervous twitch crossed the girl's face. "David, why are you saying this? You know very well that, for me, it's the person that matters, not their status or wealth." The guy averted his eyes. "I'm sorry. I've been irritable lately. It's probably because of my father's illness." Floriana asked anxiously, "What's wrong with him? Is it serious?" David waved his hand glumly. "It couldn't be more serious. I'm not good with medical terms, but there's something wrong with his back. He can't bend or straighten up. My mother is in a complete panic because my father is the mainstay of the house and I can't quit my job to help them. That's the situation, Floriana." "Why didn't you tell me before? Or did you forget that your future father-in-law is a doctor?" The young man lowered his gaze. "No, I haven't forgotten, but it's awkward somehow. Your father doesn't take too kindly to me as it is. I don't want to annoy him with requests." The girl looked affectionately at her fiancé. "David, please don't fill your head with ridiculous ideas. My father is a very decent man and an excellent doctor. It wouldn't cost him anything to arrange a consultation for your father. We just need to arrange it in advance and choose a convenient time for the visit." David perked up. "You think it's worth asking him?" Floriana laughed. "I'll talk to Dad today and call you tomorrow." The young man cheered up. "Floriana, you're a real miracle. How lucky I was to have met you that night. I can't imagine what would have happened if you had stayed with that young doctor." In a burst of emotion, David embraced Floriana, but she quickly freed herself from his embrace. "Don't be so harsh, David. Kevin is a good person. He had been courting me for a long time, but you can't command your heart, can you?" David asked defiantly, "You pity that loser? Well, know that I don't like it." The girl didn't answer his question, but her tone changed as she remarked, "David, you could have been in Kevin's place. Let's not talk about this anymore. I don't like this kind of talk." The girl stood up abruptly. "That's it, I'll have to go to work. I'll call you tomorrow." David got up and, together with his fiancé, headed for the exit of the park. He wanted to kiss the girl goodbye, but she dodged. "There are many strangers here, and I don't like to display my feelings in public. We're almost husband and wife. What is there to be shy about? And in general, you're behaving very strangely," he said unhappily. Floriana was surprised. "What's strange about my behaviour?" "At least the fact you have a wedding coming up. And you're thinking about completely unrelated things. Normal brides share their dress and hairstyle, and you—" The girl interrupted the groom mid-sentence. "David, I'm not like the others. It's a pity you still haven't realised it." Floriana hurriedly walked away, leaving the groom alone with his thoughts. David watched the girl for a long time, and only when she disappeared he thought, "My princess is not as simple as she seems." For the first time in almost 2 years, David doubted the correctness of his choice of life partner. He diligently pushed away the negative thoughts, reassuring himself that marriage with Floriana, if not making him happy, would at least allow him to live comfortably without much strain. Of course, Floriana had no idea what her future husband was thinking at these moments. After learning about David's father's illness, she began to think hard about how to help her future relative. These worries didn't leave her head, even as she plunged headfirst into the new case her boss had assigned her. Later that evening, opening her father's apartment door, Floriana sniffed the air. "Wow, is my daddy cooking something delicious?" Anthony Polono called out from the kitchen. "You guessed it, daughter. My sister sent me a recipe for a simple and hearty dish this morning. So, I decided to experiment a little at the stove." Floriana kicked off her uncomfortable heels and slipped her feet into soft slippers with pleasure. She walked into the kitchen and hugged her father. "Dad, you have no idea how much I love you." Anthony glanced at his daughter. "I adore you too, but you don't look well today. Come, wash your hands and sit at the table. In 2 minutes we can have our meal." In the small Polono family there was a rule: no talk about business during meals. Dr. Polono himself strictly observed this rule. When dinner was finished, he said with a smile, "That's it, my daughter. Now it's your turn. I cooked dinner, so you wash the dishes." Floriana was childishly embarrassed. "Dad, you know how to spoil the mood. You know very well that I can't stand washing dishes." Anthony was surprised. "What's this now? You're getting married, aren't you? Do you really expect your husband to do your dishes, laundry, and cleaning for you?" A blush broke out on the girl's cheeks. "Dad, I did get the impression you're not happy that I'm getting married. Of course, I guess you don't like David, but—" Anthony hastily interrupted his daughter. "The main thing is that you like him. But that's not the point. I hate to tell you this, but I'm more experienced in life. Perhaps I'm wrong, but your David reminds me of a gold digger." Floriana exclaimed. "Dad!" But Anthony said very calmly, "Forgive my frankness, daughter, but I've said what I think. I'll be glad if my opinion turns out to be wrong." His daughter's eyebrows furrowed. "There, you've ruined everything. Now I don't know if I should ask you." The smile lit up on the man's face again. "Daughter, ask me anything you want." Floriana told him briefly about David's father's illness. As she spoke, the expression on her father's face changed from amused to worried. "Why didn't they catch it sooner? Tell your David to bring his father to our clinic. I'll have Dr. Burnham take a look at him." Floriana was surprised. "But he has a different speciality." Anthony grinned. "Wow, another medical expert. For your information, Dr. Burnham is a highly specialized specialist. You'll be hard-pressed to find such doctors. In short, first we'll see what's going on, and then we'll decide on the treatment for our future relative. In the meantime, let our patient apply this marvelous ointment to his back. This ointment is excellent for back stiffness and pain. After a brief search at the first aid kit, Anthony took out a package of ointment and handed it to his daughter. Let David bring the medicine to his father, and he should not postpone with his consultation. The girl looked anxiously into her father's eyes. Dad, do you think it's appropriate? What exactly? Well, asking Kevin. Dr. Polono patted his daughter on the shoulder. Daughter, a doctor must be true to his oath and do his duty in any situation. Kevin is a consummate professional. For him, his patient's life is paramount, and everything else is secondary. After the conversation with his daughter, Anthony couldn't sleep for a long time. He lay awake, pondering the intricacies of his fate. How many times had it thrown serious trials his way? Was he again waiting for another test of strength? Unfortunately, he didn't know the answer to this question yet. The man rolled over on his side, hoping the change of position would help him sleep. But restless thoughts spun in his head like a merry-go-round that couldn't be stopped. Realizing that this night would be sleepless, Anthony no longer tried to force himself to sleep. He began to recall the most remarkable events of his life. Anthony discovered his vocation. Back in elementary school, he couldn't pass by an abandoned cat or dog without trying to treat wounded animals. To his parents, this hobby seemed strange, so his mother constantly scolded him. Anthony, why are you dragging everyone into the house? Didn't they tell you at school that animals transmit all sorts of diseases? The boy was indignant at this accusation. Mum, do you think if they're sick they should be thrown out? But then they'll die, and that's inhumane. His mother grumbled, but didn't dare to throw out the animals her son had temporarily taken in. His father never scolded his offspring. He supported his acts of mercy. Anthony, listen to your mum. Less and do as your heart says. Animals can't stand up for themselves, so you have to help them. God willing, you'll grow up and become a veterinarian. At first, Anthony wanted to devote himself to this profession, but then he realized he had to save people. This realization of his destiny came to him in 7th grade. Since his knowledge in some subjects was clearly lacking, he had to study hard. The village boy's diligence paid off, and he finished school with only 2 B's. Anthony resolutely declared to his parents, I will go to the capital. I want to become a famous doctor. His mother laughed in response to such a bold statement. Son, wake up. You must be from a rich family to afford to study medicine in the capital. And who are you, a simple country boy? Go to veterinary school, you won't go wrong. As always, his father stood up for his son. Mother, don't speak about what you don't know. Everything can be achieved if you have a goal and the strength for it. Who knows? Maybe our Anthony will become a doctor. Don't stand in his way. The father's word was final in their family, so the mother never raised this topic again. Anthony entered medical school on his first attempt. Throughout his student years, he focused solely on his studies and didn't get distracted by entertainment. His classmates used to tease him, Anthony, don't put too much weight on the granite of science or you'll be left without teeth, and girls won't love you. But Anthony wasn't offended by such taunts and usually replied, all in good time. I'll get my diploma, then I'll take a month off to make up for lost opportunities. But the implementation of this bold plan was prevented by one circumstance. In his final year, Anthony was offered a position in the Department of Military Surgery. He thought about it overnight and agreed in the morning. For several years, Dr. Polono performed his medical duty in various conflict zones. In one of these places, he met Bella, a young nurse at a military hospital. Their romance developed according to the classic scenario, and the couple was in no hurry to tie the knot. But one day, an incident occurred that prompted the lovers to hasten their marriage. The medical facility where they saved the lives of both military personnel and civilians was attacked one night by a gang. By some miracle, there were no casualties. When help arrived and the bandits were neutralized, Bella took a long time to recover. She was crying and, with a tremor in her voice, babbled, "That's it, Anthony, I can't go on. I really want to live. I want a normal family and children. It's good that my contract is about to expire." Anthony shared similar feelings, but felt he had no moral right to show weakness in front of his beloved. Soon, he proposed to Bella. After arduously negotiating a week's leave from his superiors, Dr. Polono travelled with his bride to the homeland. They signed their marriage certificate at the registry office. Despite its modesty, the ceremony didn't diminish the newlyweds' happiness. Anthony promised his young wife, "Bella, I swear every day of our life together will be as joyous as today." Anthony Polono would likely have kept his promise if not for fate's intervention. The couple decided to postpone having children until Anthony completed his service. Upon returning home, Bella easily found work and simultaneously searched for a position for her husband. She shared the good news over the phone. "Anthony, don't dawdle. You can't imagine how hard I had to persuade the chief to hold the surgeon's position. He only agreed because of your field experience." After 2 long years apart, the couple finally settled into domestic life. Naturally, their primary concern, starting a family, topped their list of priorities. One evening, Bella whispered in her husband's ear, "Anthony, we're having a baby. I saw the doctor today. I'm already 5 weeks along." From that day, Anthony began meticulously monitoring his wife's health. He shielded her from strain and regulated the expectant mother's daily routine. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and the couple learned they were having a girl. Anthony recalled that summer day minute by minute. He and Bella had planned to shop for maternity clothes. But as luck would have it, Anthony was urgently called to the hospital. Reluctant to disappoint his wife, he suggested, "Bella, could you please wait for me? I'll try to be quick." The woman laughed. "Ha! Quick in surgery? You'll be lucky to be back by midnight." Confused, the man asked, "So what should we do?" Bella clung to her husband, and at that moment, their baby girl stirred in her belly. Bella laughed heartily. "Our daughter has a say too." Anthony Polono knelt and pressed his ear to his wife's belly. "But I can't hear what she's saying." "I can. Our daughter says you should go to work, and we'll go shopping ourselves. I'll take Sarah and her daughter with me. She needs to shop too." Anthony knew his wife's friend well, a woman abandoned by her husband with a small child. The unfortunate woman struggled to balance her daughter and work. Bella discussed her friend's plight almost every evening, which was beginning to wear on Anthony. One day he even asked, "Bella, don't we have anything else to talk about? I understand and sympathize with Sarah, but we have our own concerns. Besides, doesn't she have relatives who could help?" Bella then got angry with him and threw a short, "She has no one. Sarah grew up in a troubled family and wants nothing to do with her relatives. And she has no husband." Anthony felt ashamed of his remarks and refrained from making similar remarks thereafter. On that fateful day, the man helped his wife to get into the cab and headed to the hospital, where a patient awaited him. As his wife had predicted, it was a complex case, and he operated for nearly 6 hours. However, when a tired but satisfied doctor left the operating room, he noticed his colleagues giving him strange looks. He asked the nurse on duty in a weak voice, "Can you explain these looks and sighs? What's wrong?" The nurse made a choking sound and burst into tears. "Dr. Polono, your wife, she's here." He rushed toward the operating room, but his colleagues blocked him. "Dr. Polono, you'd better not see her yet." He barely remembers what happened next. Everything around him became a blur of talking shadows, their words incomprehensible. Dr. Polono shouted, demanding to see his wife. He thought he heard Bella calling him. One of the young surgeons led him straight to the freight elevator, where 2 sheet-covered bodies lay on a gurney in a small hallway. At that moment, the terrible truth dawned on him. The young intern explained sorrowfully, "Your wife and her friend were both in the right side of the car when a minibus with 40 brakes hit the cab." Dr. Polono asked in a hollow voice, And the cab driver? The young intern replied. Concussion and several fractures. There was a child in the car, a girl. She was sitting on the left side behind the driver. That's what saved her. Where is she? The young doctor, surprised by the question, answered, The nurses took her to our pediatric department. It's a miracle she only has some scratches. The child welfare authorities should come for her soon. Dr. Polono strode quickly towards the pediatric department. He sat down beside the little girl and held out his hand to her. Well, Floriana, we're left alone. What shall we do? The little girl stretched out her hand to him. Dr. Polono pressed her to his chest and whispered, Don't be afraid of anything. We're destined to be together now. Outside the window, dawn was breaking. Anthony jumped out of bed cheerfully. Well then, I'll sleep later. He headed for the kitchen, glancing into his daughter's room on the way. Floriana was sound asleep, a blissful smile on her face. The man whispered, You should be happy for everyone, for Bella, Sarah, and my unborn daughter. I'll do everything so nothing interferes with your happiness. Floriana opened her eyes for a moment. Dad, is it time to get up? He quickly replied, Sleep a little longer. I'll make breakfast. Anthony didn't tell his daughter the whole truth, believing the time for confession hadn't come yet. While preparing breakfast, he decided that Floriana should know everything before her wedding. But the morning began with a small problem. Floriana, as promised, called David. She thought he'd be happy to hear that her father was going to personally take care of his father's treatment, but instead of gratitude, she heard annoyance. Floriana, it's not a good time. I can't today. I have a full day's work, and tomorrow too. It's a complete emergency here. The girl was surprised. David, is it so difficult to ask for leave? It's about your father's health, isn't it? For about half a minute, only David's noisy breathing was heard. After a long pause, he said, I understand everything, but I can't risk my job because of my father. If my boss throws me out, where else will I find such a cushy position? The girl was at a loss. Suddenly, David exclaimed, Floriana, could you go to my parents after your work? I'll be truly grateful if you help me out. The girl had other plans for the evening, but couldn't refuse the man who was soon to become her husband. Without enthusiasm, she said, All right, David, I'll check on your parents and give them the ointment. David rejoiced at the quick resolution of the problem. Then you could give my father a lift to town on your way back as well. Why waste time? Let him spend the night at your place. I think your father won't mind. Floriana was accustomed to coordinating with her father everything concerning their joint household, so she answered uncertainly, Yes, of course he won't mind. The workday flew by instantly. Floriana managed to unearth ironclad evidence against the ex-husband of the new client, and she was pleased with the results of her efforts. So her father wouldn't worry. She called him. Dad, I'll be late tonight. I'm visiting David's parents. Can't he do it himself? Floriana realized from her father's voice that he wasn't happy about that news. She herself didn't like that David had pushed the care of his parent onto her either, and all the way to the village, she pondered her situation. At some point, a treacherous thought visited her. Didn't I rush into this marriage? She diligently chased the thought away, but it kept returning. It was already dark when the familiar outlines of the village where David's parents lived appeared in the distance. But the road to the village was so broken that Floriana had to drive at minimum speed, further complicated by the dim street lighting. The girl tried to find the right house from memory, but it was difficult to navigate in almost complete darkness. She got out of the car and walked down the street towards a house with lit windows. Soon the girl heard voices that sounded familiar to her. Oh, I'm at my destination. Floriana quickened her pace. She walked into the yard and froze, realizing she had made a mistake with the house. The girl was about to turn around when she heard voices again from the open window. She realized she had accidentally found herself in the yard of David's parents' neighbors. The Taylors were talking loudly, but the strangest thing was that they were discussing the Baileys. It was the surname that made Floriana listen breathlessly to the conversation. Mrs. Taylor was doing most of the talking, with Mr. Taylor only occasionally making short remarks. Apparently, the conversation had started not long ago, so Floriana caught its essence. "You can't believe people like that. We live not knowing there are such scoundrels around us," Mrs. Taylor said to her husband. "Don't frown. You know what I'm saying about the Baileys. They pretend to be decent, especially Nina, but the other day she boasted to the woman that her son seduced a city fool whose father is a big shot with lots of money." "Why are you going around the village gathering gossip?" Mr. Taylor's judgmental voice was heard. "What gossip? I heard it with my own ears." Nina bragging about her son's exploits. The wife objected. She'd better explain how her David got Laurie pregnant and then abandoned her. "Yes, he did wrong. The girl waited for him while he was in the army, and he left her in a difficult moment." Floriana felt that she was short of air. A terrible thought burned in Floriana's mind. David is not who he says he is. No, David couldn't have done that. Maybe the reason for the breakup was different. But her inner voice immediately snidely remarked, "Then why didn't he tell you that he had had a pregnant girlfriend?" The emotions were so strong that Floriana instinctively took a step to the side, stumbled, and a sharp pain pierced her ankle. She screamed. From the window she heard, "Thomas, look who's walking under our windows." The landlord jumped out of the house shouting, "Who's there?" Limping on one leg, Floriana emerged from the shade of the trees. "Mr. Taylor, don't be frightened. It's Floriana. I'm a little lost." The man took a closer look at the uninvited guest. "Helen, it's the neighbour's daughter-in-law. She's wandered into our yard." The hosts cordially brought the night guest in, and Mrs. Taylor told her in detail how David had treated his ex-girlfriend. Laurie worked at the post office and rode her bicycle around the villages to keep up with deliveries. Sometimes she delivered correspondence until late at night. Our roads are treacherous, with ravines, quarries and other obstacles. Once, Laurie was unlucky. She fell off a cliff while taking a shortcut, breaking both her legs and her spine. Poor Laurie's father thought the girl wouldn't survive, but she did. However, she remained disabled. Floriana was anxious to know what part David had played in this story. Mrs. Taylor was reluctant to continue. "I don't want to badmouth David, but right after Laurie's accident, he went to the city. Our villagers condemned him, and Nina defended her son, saying she didn't raise her son to take care of a disabled person. Then it became known that Laurie was pregnant when the accident happened to her." Excitement dried Floriana's mouth, and she asked the landlady for water. Mrs. Taylor gave her a full mug. "Didn't David tell you anything about Laurie?" The girl shook her head. "No, this is the first time I've heard the story, and it's good that I did. Tell me, where is Laurie now?" This time it was Mr. Taylor who spoke up. "They're nearby in a neighbouring village. Carl, her father, went straight to his sister's place. She has a big house. Sometimes he comes here to check on this house." Floriana thanked her hosts and headed for the exit. Mrs. Taylor ran after her. "Where are you going at night? You should spend the night here." The girl grinned bitterly. "Thanks for the invitation, but I have to go." She took out a packet of ointment from her purse. "Mrs. Taylor, could you give this to David's father? He has back trouble, and this ointment is very effective." The woman began to examine the packaging. "All right, I'll pass it on in the morning. But why don't you make your future relatives happy yourself?" Floriana waved her hand dismissively. "I don't feel like it, and it's late." More than anything, she wanted to cry on her father's reliable shoulder, but Floriana realized she shouldn't sour and give in to emotions, as an unbalanced state is dangerous for driving. Gathering all her willpower, she concentrated on the road. It was well past midnight when she opened her apartment door. Floriana didn't have time to flick the switch before she heard her father's voice. "Finally, you've arrived. I've been anxious all day after your call." Floriana rushed to her father and burst into tears. "Daddy, I almost made the biggest mistake of my life." Dr. Polono let his daughter cry, and when she calmed down, asked, "What are you going to do now?" The girl confidently said, "I know one thing for sure, there will be no wedding. For now, it's better to go through life alone than to marry a man who can betray you at any moment." The next morning, Floriana calmly informed David about her decision. The guy clearly didn't expect such a sharp reversal. He began to shout that it was all a lie, that the evil neighbours had slandered his good name, that he had no daughter, and that Laurie had fathered a child with an unknown lover. It was unpleasant to listen to all this, and Floriana only said, "You're so mean," and hung up. That same day she went to the registry office and withdrew their application for wedding. For some reason afterward, her soul felt lighter, as if cleared of unnecessary junk. David took the breakup painfully, besieging Floriana with constant calls. First he begged her to come to her senses, then he began to threaten. His parents joined the process of trying to salvage their son's happiness. Of course, the main actor was his mother, while his father silently agreed with his wife. 2 years have passed. Every minute, Floriana looked at the door, behind which Kevin Burnham had disappeared an hour ago. She knew that behind this austere door, real magic was happening. After all, her husband was a true magician, giving people back their ability to move and walk. "Floriana, will my mum be able to walk?" Hope froze in little Molly Brown's eyes. Floriana hugged the girl. "Mummy will definitely be able to walk. We just have to wait and believe." The little girl sighed heavily. "I can wait a whole day, even a whole year. Aunt Floriana, tell me, will Mummy's other leg be sewn back on?" "Who told you such nonsense? Your mum's not a rag doll who can replace an arm or a leg. She'll be fitted with a special device. Walk with it for a few months, and when it's removed, she won't need crutches anymore." Molly was deeply impressed by this explanation. "Just like in a fairy tale. When I grow up, I'll become a doctor like Dr. Kevin and Dr. Anthony. I'll fix children's legs when they break them." The girl began to speculate aloud about her distant future, her thin voice ringing eerily loud in the spacious corridor. Finally, the door Floriana was watching opened, and Dr. Burnham appeared on the threshold. With a joyful smile, he said, "Everything's fine, girls. We can register our first success." Molly ran up to the doctor. "Kevin, can I go to my mum?" Dr. Burnham stroked the little girl's smoothly coiffed head with undistinguished tenderness. "Let your mum sleep a little, and then you can visit her. In the meantime, you and Floriana can take a walk in the park. Fresh air is good for both of you." Floriana agreed with her husband. "Perhaps you're right, we should freshen up a bit." She held out her hand, and with his help, she stood up. "God, I'm getting as clumsy as a turtle." The man laughed. "If that's the case, I have to tell you that you're a very adorable turtle." Kevin stared at Floriana and said very quietly, "And there's an equally adorable little turtle inside." Floriana glanced pointedly at Molly. "Kevin, mind what you're saying in front of the child." Not the least bit embarrassed, the little girl declared, "You think I don't know anything. I know that little babies first grow in the tummy so they won't be stolen, and then they're born." The adults laughed with relief, and Kevin said, "Smart little girl. That's an interesting theory you've come up with. Let me walk you to the exit, or you might get lost in the labyrinth of corridors in our clinic." Floriana was enjoying the spring sunshine, and Molly was having fun on the small playground located on the clinic grounds. She had already made friends and was telling them something enthusiastically. Floriana looked at the little girl, hardly believing this was the same child she had seen 2 years ago in an old house on the edge of an unfamiliar village. After the breakup with David, she had immediately gone searching for Laurie, whose existence she had learned about from David's neighbour. Although the village indicated by Mrs. Taylor was only a few kilometres away, Floriana spent half a day searching for this settlement. But the most shocking thing was that almost no one lived in that village. A few streets with houses boarded up windows presented a very dreary sight. There were no stores or other signs of civilization. The only bright spot in this dystopian picture was a little girl playing in the tall grass. For a few minutes, Floriana silently watched the child, not daring to approach. But a mature woman came out of a nearby house and asked in a formidable voice, "What do you want?" Floriana whispered, "I'm looking for Carl Walsh." The woman cast her another unkind look. "From the Social Security office or what? At last they've started dealing. I was about to complain." Soon it turned out that Laurie was the woman's niece, and she was in an almost helpless state. Due to inquiries, she had limited mobility, but the young mother wasn't given disability status, so her aunt had to handle everything herself. She began complaining to Floriana at once. "If only I were younger. But I'm already in my 6th decade. My strength isn't what it used to be." Floriana asked about Laurie's father, and the woman burst into tears. "He died last month. I'm all alone now. If something happens to me, my Laurie will be completely lost." Of course, after what she had seen, Floriana couldn't turn around and leave. She went to the house where she met Laurie. David's former fiancé didn't welcome the guest warmly either. "Why did you come here? To enjoy my helplessness? Well, go ahead and admire." The young woman jumped out of her chair, forgetting about her crutches, and almost fell. Floriana managed to catch her in time. "Laurie, I came for another purpose. I want to help you and your daughter." Laurie didn't relent. "Did David send you? Does he want to make up for his guilt?" Floriana pleaded. "Laurie, calm down. Nobody sent me. David and I have parted ways." The young women talked for a long time, then cried together. Floriana stayed at Laurie's aunt's house for the night, leaving early the next morning. She told her father the sad story of the woman David had abandoned. Anthony Polono said firmly, "We should take her to Dr. Burnham. I'm sure that Kevin will help her." In just one day, Laurie's fate changed. She had undergone several complex surgeries, but the belief that she would walk again gave her strength. Floriana, however, felt she needed to do more for her. Despite her pregnancy, she continued her law practice, planning to secure alimony from David Bailey for Molly's upbringing through the court. With all the evidence in hand, she only needed to await the trial. Floriana shivered when she heard a voice behind her. "Ah, there you are, lawyer." She turned to see David's hateful look, but remained composed. "Yeah, I'm here. Why have you shown up?" David struck a defiant pose. "I've come to tell you that you won't succeed. You can't pin someone else's brat on me. I know this is your way of getting back at me, but I'll never acknowledge this child. I'll deny everything." Floriana rose from the bench. "David, everything's already proven. Laurie gave birth to your daughter. I also want to tell you that I thank God I figured you out in time." She turned her back on her former fiancé and called out, "Molly, we have to go. Your mum's probably waiting for us by now." The girl looked at David with curiosity. "Floriana, who's that sir you were talking to?" Floriana answered indifferently, "Just a passerby. Come along now." For the first time, David felt the sting of remorse. He watched Floriana and the little girl running beside her, a deep pain taking hold. This unfamiliar feeling stunned him, leaving him at a loss for how to shake it off.